In 2007, an intense struggle was taking place in one of the most violent areas of Iraq. The US Army was fully engaged. As a BBC correspondent and cameraman, we watched them fight for their lives.
I was positive that I wasn't coming home. I knew it just because we were losing guys left and right.
Sergeant Faulkner just stopped bleeding. Wasn't anything left in there to bleed out with. He was gone.
Now, more than a decade later, we wanted to look at the effect of the Iraq War on those who we met.
And it was just like out of nowhere, you know, it's like I could barely hold on. I had to run into the wood line. I just started like, you know, I'm crying. What the hell's wrong with me?
This is a story about how war changes people, why they go, how it binds them, and how life afterwards is never quite the same. The men of 2nd Platoon Gator Company 212 Infantry came from the heartlands, places like Oklahoma, Texas, and Pennsylvania. We've tracked them down, a plain-spoken sample of the nearly 4 million Americans who've served in Iraq and Afghanistan, a distinct cohort of society that now lives with the consequences of what was called the War on Terror.
I had a little bit of the post-9/11 fever, you know, a little bit of bitterness, hostility towards the people who carried out the attack. I think I just wanted a little bit of adventure, and I got it.
I said, I want to do the stuff that they do on the recruiting videos. And he says, well, I guess that'd be infantry. And I said, yeah, why not?
This is Combat Outpost Gator, the swamp.
And their imagined war collided with reality in a place called Doura.
First-hand witnesses.
In 2007, the Islamic State, in its first incarnation, was trying to set up a capital in this southern suburb of Baghdad. The Americans opposed them by putting an outpost right in the middle of Doura Market. As the insurgents did everything they could to dislodge the Americans, cameraman Mark McCauley and I embedded with them and witnessed the fighting. We found in the 2nd Platoon a group of men who were open and philosophical about the business at hand.
When you see all the generals, do you think they've got a real grasp of what's going on down here?
They're able to project what they want to. You know, they want it to look stable, so they walk around, they project stability. I'm sure they're well aware of the situation. Team 1, first order of movement.
Dorian Perez was the first sergeant, a father figure to the platoon. He was indelibly marked by its experience.
So I'm dealing with these depressions. I'm dealing with, you know, sometimes I'm really happy. You know, I'm top of life. Everybody sees this big smiley guy running around having a great time. And then sometimes in the middle of the night, you know, I wake up at 2 in the morning, and so what now? You know, no sleep, no rest. You do that for periods of time, up to a month maybe.
I dinged off my helmet just yesterday. And I love this. I'm gonna make a necklace out of it. It's gonna be right here. It's gonna be my good luck charm.
Nick Mazzarella, then 20, a Floridian who survived several bomb strikes.
I was positive that I wasn't coming home. I knew it just because we were losing guys left and right.
We had a truck blown up a few weeks ago, and 2 of my friends got killed. That was a big explosion. That was a real bad one.
This was Benjamin Jones's first operational tour. He was 24 when we first talked and is now 35.
Soldiers and Marines, for example, have to be trained to be able to go through a firefight and make the right moves and the right decisions without totally losing it. But they can't make it so that you can necessarily properly deal with it later on, after you've had time to internalize it.
Nick Mazzarella left the Army 8 years ago, returning to Fort Myers, Florida, and the support of his family. His kids are at school there, and a key part of what keeps him grounded.
91.
Nice, that's an A. 90 or above is an A. All right, tell me about your day, buddy.
You know, I don't like burgers, so I had goldfish.
But he feels it's too early to tell them what he did in Iraq. He's been dealing with the psychological scars of that tour ever since his platoon got back from Doura.
I had quite a few nights of drinking a lot to try to numb the pain. And as my wife will tell you, she had to sit there and listen to me bawling my eyes out, pretty much blackout drunk, talking about the guys I lost and all the pain I was going through.
Benjamin Jones came home also to Pennsylvania, a few miles from where he grew up. Like Nick, he took advantage of educational opportunities after the army, and that helped him get a job with the police. But a decade ago, he found his first marriage in a downward spiral.
I don't know if it was because I had changed or she had changed, or maybe we both did, but we weren't the people that we had been, and it just didn't work anymore.
Leaving the army, Dorian divorced and threw himself into studying agriculture, helping farmers adopt better practices. But it's not been an easy road. The experience of battle still weighs heavy on him. He's gone to the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington. His father is a veteran of that war, and perhaps it was his example that led Dorian into combat. But people who've experienced battle know that it can leave a bitter legacy in the mind. Post-traumatic stress disorder.
My original position was PTSD's full of shit. You know, I mean, it's not real. This is something that people are using to try to get some money from the VA. And I'm out walking with a unit because I was part of a training command. And someone throws a flashbang because that's how you demonstrate an IED in a training environment. And it was just like out of nowhere, you know. It's like it's like I could barely hold on. I had to run into the wood line. I just started like, you know, I'm crying. What the hell's wrong with me?
What's up, brother? How you doing, man? Ah!
It's nearly 10 years since Dorian and Ben met, but the former first sergeant has travelled up to Pennsylvania to put that right.
And besides, this is great because I got my long distance, and for close quarters, I got 45-degree offset irons.
Both of them have suffered from their experience of violence, but both find in firearms a comfort and a hedge against the anxiety that Iraq has left them with.
I get out of the Army and I have my pistol, my 45, and that was my, I guess, comfort. You know, it's like you get so used to sleeping with your weapon within arm's reach. You know, my pistol started off at my nightstand, and I don't know how, but I ended up sleeping with it under my pillow. It's like my hypervigilance went up instead of going down as time progressed. It's like I wanted it closer and closer, and you know, this is not like it's a pistol with a cold chamber. It's locked and loaded. It's ready for somebody to come to the door.
For Nick, this bar has become a way to switch off after work at a nearby mental health clinic. But like many an old soldier, he's not found the relationship with alcohol easy. His mother told me she's worried about his tendency to isolate himself and drink.
She can tell that obviously I've got PTSD, and heavy drinking doesn't really help that. It's pretty detrimental. But she's a really great mom, and she reaches out to me all the time just to ask how I'm doing and if there's anything she can do, and just to remind me that she loves me. And that's one of the key components of me functioning pretty well right now.
Nick's ambition is to become a psychiatric nurse dealing specifically with veterans. He's all too aware of the burden they all share.
All of us came home with life-changing injuries. I mean, we all got banged up and tossed around to the point that we're not the same anymore, you know.
This is Staff Sergeant Jared Fontenot, glimpsed during our first embed. He was not there for the second. He was shot in October 2007.
Some of the guys grabbed Fontenot and dragged him into the back of our Humvee, cut the vest off of him and tried to stop the bleeding.
I remember we brought him into the truck and I was in the gun and I was, you know, trying to do CPR on him and trying to keep him alive, but he was totally unresponsive.
They got him to hospital, but too late.
Adrenaline wore off and emotions came flooding in, and Maz and I sat down and had a smoke. Some guys came up and washed some blood out of the Humvee, and that was that.
He was gone?
He was gone.
While they'd been trying to save Staff Sergeant Fontenot, an Apache helicopter had arrived over Doura to take care of the sniper who'd shot him. Seeing one man pass a rifle to another over a wall, they engaged a car with 3 people in it.
I don't know. I didn't see anything. Weapons running away.
Roger.
Yep.
You get a copy, a description of the wounds so they can be prepared to...
Wasn't the gun. Engaging.
Do we have any idea of where in the body got shot over?
Mop it up.
Hey, 2-6.
You've got them in sight.
And I've watched that a billion times. Should it make me feel good? I don't know. I don't know if that's right or not, but it does. It at least lets me know that the guy that pulled that trigger and his getaway driver were not going to do that to some other soldier or Marine or civilian.
In the year after Doura, none of the 2nd Platoon took their own lives. But following their next tour in Afghanistan, one soldier did. The effects of PTSD are now blamed for a national epidemic in veteran suicides.
So nearly 4,500 American troops were killed in action in Iraq. But between 2005 and the end of this year, the figure of veterans lost to suicide will reach 100,000. Now, those are people who served in various conflicts, but the stark thing is the number, 22 a day.
So the thought, of course, you know, should I just die? You know, I'm sure, I don't know, I'm gonna say I'm sure it crosses everybody's mind. That's probably, maybe that's not true. So it's crossed my mind, you know, do I really need to still be here type thing. But I've never been at that point where I consider myself at risk.
7 months after our first visit, we embedded with the 2nd Platoon for a second time.
Well, we're pushing into Doura, which is a district in the south of Baghdad.
We witnessed a remarkable transformation. Walls had shut out death squads, and a local militia, many of them former insurgents, recruited to help keep the peace.
Like before, we go in and like, oh, the Americans are here. But now it's like, hey, the Americans are here. How you doing?
As they ended a 15-month tour in Iraq, 3 of the 40 men who deployed with the platoon had been killed and more than a dozen wounded. They'd brought extraordinary change, but even so, the soldiers weren't sure that it had been worth it.
No, not even close. It wasn't worth a single one of them.
I know that the soldiers that we've lost out here died for a reason. I'm not exactly sure what that reason was.
Today, that issue still resonates.
If I say it wasn't worth it, then I feel like I would be saying that all my friends died in vain. And I can't get myself to that point. I think at least for a few years, what we did in the Doura district made it so people who would generally have a shit life, if they lived to be old and gray, would at least be able to look back and say, I can remember when there were good times. And maybe that made it worth it for somebody.
You know, in those 10 years, we've had Maliki, we've had ISIL, you know, the defacing of all those ancient artifacts. We'll never get those back, you know, and this is because of a pocket that policy created. So now, 10 years later, I don't know if it's worth it anymore.
I hope that we've learned our lesson when it comes to trying to fix other countries and not focusing as much on our own. I feel like we look outward a little bit too much. I feel like there's a lot to do here on the home front.
It's interesting talking to the soldiers about where they've emerged politically as a result of their life experience and their service. A couple of them feel really there's nobody now who represents them politically in the American setup. One of them is a keen Trump supporter. But the thing that unites all of them is a strong feeling that America should no longer be the world's policeman and should be focusing on problems at home.
Dorian, on his own, still craving adventure and a challenge, is moving to Alaska to work with farmers there.
They're like, why Alaska? It's the last frontier. I mean, a degree of it is internal peace. I find comfort sometimes in being around people, mostly when I'm out in these places where I've experienced what I feel, the presence of God, in places like standing on top of a mountain at a sunrise.
In Pennsylvania, Benjamin Jones, meanwhile, has a new job with the police and is remarried, raising his kids, one of whom he's named Gibson, as a living reminder of William Gibson, who was killed in Doura.
Everyone always asks me, like, oh, he's named after the guitar. I was like, no, he's not named after the guitar. He's named after one of my friends that died in Iraq. I feel if we forget our fallen brothers, that we are invalidating them. Because if we don't remember them, and if we don't tell their stories and talk about what kind of men they were, who's going to remember them? And if they're not remembered, was what they did and was the sacrifice that they made even worthwhile?
There are countless reminders of the ways in which the 2nd Platoon is still fighting, and their experience now marks the next generation as well as their own.